Okay. So, Sarah, what inspired you to become an author?
Hiya, Maeve, and hi, Rory, and thanks a million for inviting me to be part of this. I suppose, like, I often find it hard to answer that question because I think I was writing for as long as I can remember. You know, I used to get in trouble in school when I was supposed to be focusing on my maths, because I was always writing crazy little stories on my lap furtively under the desk. And so I think it was a compulsion from the time I was a really small kid. I remember very clearly learning the skills of writing, like with a pen, and that you could, you know, arrange the letters together yourself and create words. And I remember being absolutely kind of euphoric about realizing that that was something you could do yourself. So yeah, I think it's been in me, you know, really forever. And then I was also very kind of inspired by storytellers in my family. My grandmother was a brilliant storyteller and a really big reader, and used to read to me and my cousins and siblings, you know, kind of big books, chapter by chapter. And they were kind of like our Netflix series. You know, we would be delighted about the next chapter. So books and stories and writing were part of my life from the time I was very young.
Oh, wow.
Would you say you have a favorite book from your childhood?
I always find that the weirdest thing always happens to me, Rory, when someone says, what was your favorite book? They all fly out of my head as if I've never read anything, and yet I was a big reader. I remember very much a lot of the really old-fashioned books, like Anne of Green Gables was a real favorite of mine. I loved picture books when I was really small. My favorites were things like The Fox and the Tom Ten. I loved Pippi Longstocking. So that's kind of dating me because they're fairly old stories and books. I loved kind of graphic novels and picture books, or kind of cartoons like Peanuts and Snoopy and Asterix and Obelisk and all those. So yeah, I was pretty indiscriminate as a child reading and growing up. I think if I was to identify my favorite book as a child, this is when I was a bit older, I think I have to say The Catcher in the Rye was probably my favorite book that I read when I was young. It just made me, it was one of the books that made me want to be a writer myself, I think.
So when you decided that you wanted to be a writer, who supported you on that journey? Like, who kind of gave you the backup saying go for it, stuff like that?
Yeah, that's such a good question, because I think the person who held me back most was myself. You know, I think I got loads of encouragement. My dad was a very creative person. There was a real excitement about writing in my family and among my friends, but I was very secretive about it. I was sure I was no good. So I was writing very furtively and very secretively, especially not when I was very small, but when I grew, when I was a teenager in my 20s, I just didn't really rate myself as a writer. So the one thing I would say to anybody who is an aspiring writer is the thing that can really slow you down is a lack of self-belief. And it can make you kind of not try as hard as you might otherwise. So just go for it, I think, is the thing. And I didn't do that until I was, till I was well into my kind of 30s and then 40s. So the support was there, but I didn't believe in myself enough to avail of it, and I think that happens to a lot of people. But I'm glad I finally did go for it, because it's been a brilliant part of my life ever since.
When did you kind of start writing sort of professionally as a job?
Yeah, so my first novel for children was published in 2013, and it was about, I suppose, the 5 years before that publication was when I really decided to take myself seriously as a writer. Now, my full-time job, my day job is as an academic and as a teacher. So that hasn't changed, but writing has become a really focused part of my life since my first publication in 2013. And since then, I've published 7 novels altogether and a couple of other things. So it's been, the last decade has been really a very kind of exciting creative time for me.
So, some of your stories, like All the Money in the World, what's the actual story, or were some of the characters like Penny or that, were they based off real people or real events?
Um, yeah, that's a great question. I'm actually going to have to turn off the light here because we're in transit. So I'm going to go blank on you, but you'll still be able to hear me. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, I'm still here, coming from the spooky darkness at the back of the car. So, I like to, when I'm writing the stories, I don't necessarily have anybody in mind, but I think it's almost impossible for me. I don't know whether this is the same for other writers, but I think it's impossible for me not to be influenced by the people I know, or the people I love, or some of the villains in my own life can sometimes creep into the stories, but I never do it on purpose. I think a lot of characters are amalgams of people that I know in life. In many ways, if I think about All the Money in the World, I think there's a lot of my younger self in Penny, actually. So I think sometimes a lot of people say that writers, all the characters that writers create are elements of themselves, and maybe there's an element of that too. So I did, my second novel is called The Apple Tart of Hope, and that there's a character in that novel called Oscar, and he's based on one of my best friends that I grew up with when I was young. So that was very much a kind of direct sort of inspiration from real life. But the rest of the characters are amalgams and mixtures and exaggerations of real people.
Ooh, that's very interesting, actually. On the topic of characters, is there any character out there that you'd like to just sit down and have tea with?
I'd love to. Yeah, there's lots. I'd love to meet Holden Caulfield. I think that would be. He felt like a very real character to me. Friend and colleague Joseph O'Connor called My Father's House, and there's characters. There's a band of characters in that book that feel very real to me, that feel like they just jump off the page. They're three-dimensional. So yeah, I often find myself wondering what these characters would be like in real life. It's a test of a good book if you find yourself wishing that you could meet them, isn't it?
Yes, it's very much so. Yeah, I can attest to that. I think that if you do want to meet them, then in a way it makes them feel more real, and it kind of makes you care about them a lot more.
Oh, definitely.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's the skill in the writing. If you read a book where the characters feel so relatable and so real, and you understand their motives, and you see them with all their flaws, and you still want to root for them, I think that's just a sign of really good writing, because it's a difficult thing to do, to create relatable characters who people believe in. That's the challenge, I guess, isn't it?
Yes, I think, yeah. Like, I think Harry Potter, for example, was really good because people saw themselves in him. So I think you kind of have to relate to the audience as well.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
If you weren't a writer, what would you like to be?
I absolutely love, I'm not very good at it, but I love when I have time to cook. I really love cooking. I really love planning ingredients. I really love when a meal kind of comes together and goes really well. I think it can be really creative as well. So part of me thinks, like the fantasy part of me thinks, that I would like to be a cook or a chef, and that would be a really fun thing to do. But I don't know if the people who actually eat my food would agree.
Oh God.
Well, I'm sure it's great.
Thanks.
Would cooking be sort of a large part of your creative process?
I just think there's actually quite a lot of comparisons between cooking and storytelling. It sounds weird, but I actually do. I've thought about this before, that you take all these ingredients and they've got integrity on their own, and then somehow you've got to build them into something that you've got to create something completely new from them. So I think it is. I think it's a very creative thing, and I think the creative process is similar in when you're writing as when you're pulling together a really good meal.
What would be your favorite thing to cook?
Actually, it's funny. We had I cooked enchiladas last night with guacamole and sour cream and peppers, and we hadn't had that for ages. So I've reminded myself that that's one of my favorites.
Oh,
Wow.
nice.
They are lovely. Quite lovely.
I have to agree. Have to agree there.
Ah, yes. Is there any foods then out there that you would just not like to cook?
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
Oh, is there any foods out there that you don't like?
No, I'm an omnivore. I eat. Well, actually, no, that's ridiculous because I'm a vegetarian, so I don't eat meat. But I eat like loads, and I love food, and I love kind of lots of different kinds of food, and I like to be really adventurous when it comes to eating and cooking food. But I am I'm pretty much a vegetarian, and so I don't really like cooking meat anymore.
Interesting.
What made you go off meat? Just did you ever eat meat beforehand, or were you always vegetarian?
Yeah, no, I used to be a carnivore, and I kind of loved it, but I don't know. It sounds a bit preachy, but I kind of feel that if you can lead a healthy life without eating animals, then I think it's probably just as good not to eat them, basically. So, and I think you can have a really healthy lifestyle without eating meat. And I do kind of worry about the way animals are treated and how they're kept and how frightened they often are before they're killed for food. And I just don't like being part of that, actually. Yeah. But I know that sounds really judgy, and my husband eats meat and my son eats meat, and I don't really expect other people to feel the same as I do, but that's just the way I feel.
Well, that's understandable.
Yeah, it's a good cause, in fairness. I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing it, so you know what I mean? It's not like murder. So
yeah, exactly.
Are any of your characters vegetarian?
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought of it. And I don't think I've ever been specific about any of my characters being vegetarian. I probably could tell you which ones are likely to be vegetarian. Like, imagine Oscar in The Apple Heart of Hope is vegetarian, and I would say there were some characters in my last book, The Shark and the Scar, who would be veggies as well, because I would say Jay and his father, who are kind of end up being vegetable growers and sell lots of organic vegetables in the market. I'd say they're probably pretty likely to be vegetarians, but I've never been completely precise or explicit about that in any of the books, but it's interesting. Maybe I'll do that someday.
That's good.
That was going to be my next question. What do you think after this food inspired conversation, would you write about some vegetarian characters?
Sorry, you two have just been so inspiring about giving me all sorts of ideas about what direction I might go in next. And I think you've unlocked a whole idea around food and vegetarianism and ethical eating and stuff like that, which might be an interesting part of a new storyline. So yeah, so you've given me loads of ideas about, and it's certainly something I'm going to think about after this chat.
Ooh, that's good. What would
Have
be
you any book? No, you go first, Rory.
What would be one of your characters' favorite foods?
Well, the second book that I wrote is very kind of food orientated because it's called The Apple Tart of Hope, and the main character Oscar has this kind of magical power where he makes apple tarts for people who are suffering or people he knows are in pain, and he has this theory that if you make it carefully enough and with enough love in your heart, that you can cure people of the things that are causing them grief or sorrow or suffering. So that's a major theme in that book, and I do think food as healing is a really interesting concept, and I really like the idea of exploring that.
Interesting.
Have you any new content on the way?
I'm working at the moment on a historical novel about the Mexican-American War, which is it's not really a very comprehensively spoken about or understood time in history, but it happened between 1846 and 1848, which is exactly the time that a lot of Irish people left Ireland to escape poverty and the hunger of the famine. And a lot of young boys ended up being enlisted in the American army and finding themselves fighting against the Mexicans. And very many of them had a kind of crisis of conscience, because they saw that what the Americans were doing was a kind of a land grab, and was a very kind of, it wasn't a just or ethical war. And many of them decided to swim across the Rio Grande and to fight for the other side with the Mexican army. And there's a whole band of Irish men called the San Patricios who are celebrated every year in Mexico on what's known as the Wall of Heroes to this day. And it's a story that isn't very widely known still in Ireland. And I'm in the middle of trying to write a novel about that, because I just think it's a really interesting and inspiring story. And I have a short story that has that theme that has been published in the London magazine this month. So I'm working on that, and it's obsessing me, and it's a really interesting time in history, and I think it's a really interesting story, and I'm trying to kind of create a fictional account of it at the moment.
Oh, wow.
I'll definitely find that when it comes out. I love history.
I do.
Thanks, Méabh. Yeah. It's I think, and I'm not a historian, and I'm not really very informed about history, but it's amazing when you become obsessed about something, how much information you can absorb, and how much it can feed your imagination as a creative writer as well.
Oh yes. Sure, we are all history itself anyway. So
yeah, exactly. That's so true.
Yeah, that is so true. So yeah, I had a question in my mind. Now it's gone.
Fuck.
Oh yeah, is there any authors that inspired you? That you love to read?
I mean, I've been just so particularly by kind of a lot of the newer Irish writers. I mean, I can't even call them new anymore, but so I love Irish writers, people like Sarah Baum and Emer McBride and Danielle McLaughlin and Donal Ryan, of course, and I mentioned Joseph O'Connor and Nicole Flattery and Wendy Erskine and Colin Barrett and Kevin Barry. I mean, there's just so many really great Irish writers working today and producing such good stuff that I think we're having, we're really lucky to be, anyone who's writing or interested in creative writing, it's just we're so lucky to live in Ireland, because we're surrounded everywhere by really stunning writers. So there's a lot of inspiration out there these days.
Yes, we are a writing bunch in our nature.
We really are.
Oh yeah, sure. The Celts were all writers.
Yeah, like when you think about it, you go back to early Christian Ireland and the monks are writing scripts and scrolls and the Book of Kells and stuff like that.
Yeah. Sure, it's in our DNA almost.
No, exactly. It really is. And I think there's also an element of subversion in Irish writing that's different from maybe other places, because a lot of the writing is about rebellion, or it's about subversion, or it's about kind of transgressing boundaries. So there's a lot of really interesting themes that kind of come from our history, and as you say, are part of our DNA as a culture.
Yes.
I can agree with that.